This is Informer News, your voice of the people. Timeline is Sunday the 17th of August 2014. Welcome along, my friends, to another edition of Informer News. Coming up in this week's broadcast, WORMWOOD, NIBIRU, the end of the world as we know it is fast approaching. Plus, overwhelming evidence the plane shot down over Ukraine was Flight 370. Was this shootdown ordered by Washington to dispose of the evidence of the plane and passengers that ended up in Diego Garcia, a US military base? Also, Ebola virus, now sweeping Western Africa, could become a threat to us all. Are we seeing the onset of a new horrific global pandemic? Plus the genocide being carried out by the Zionist-controlled Jewish state, and proof the Earth's axis has changed. Okay, into this week's news. This first report is an Informer News presentation. Over the months and years, the Informer has been warning you all that the shadow governments, the controlling elite of the United States, are planning to trigger a third global war as part of their plan to distract the public from the incoming NIBIRU system. This plan is well underway. The Middle East is in complete turmoil thanks to the United States and Western powers causing instability in the whole region. They aim to divide the Muslim communities, causing fighting between different Muslim groups, which they have achieved. Their original plan to cause a devastating war with Iran has failed thanks to moderate politicians coming to power in Iran who knew what the Western powers were up to and reversed their policy of complete hostility to the United States. And they planned a dialogue with them, which is going on to this present day. Syria was another failed project after the US had caused the instability of that country, which they expected the leadership to collapse and their puppet regime would be installed. But the Assad government remained resolute and strong, and I believe is now gaining the upper hand. So after this failed project, the elite then turned to Ukraine, where they were behind installing this Nazi-controlled government to power, and the attacks on the east of that country followed. These criminals that are causing mayhem and death and destruction in that once proud nation are now making sure their shells fall into Russia. Now for what the people of the United States don't know. The Russian leadership and the United States leadership are the closest of allies and have been involved in the secret space program together for decades. They also have joint bases on the Moon and Mars. The anti-Russian campaign by the mainstream news media in the States is playing mind games with the great American people and the world. All the major power players in the world have been briefed about the coming of NIBIRU and the plan to initiate a third global war. Do you really think the Russians would not have retaliated by now if these two great countries were not friends? Of course they would. But you can expect some kind of false flag event to occur very soon that will initiate a controlled global war. Their main aim is to eradicate a large section of the human race. This, I believe, will occur sooner rather than later. Flight MH17 was a false flag event. The plane that was hit by a missile from the Nazi-controlled government of Ukraine, ordered by the controllers in the States. There is now overwhelming evidence this flight that was brought down was the missing aircraft Flight 370, which went missing and was diverted to the US military base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, where a passenger on that aircraft found out his head was covered so he could not see. He said he hid his mobile phone, so he phoned out and confirm what had occurred. Anyway, the US was desperate to get rid of all the evidence, so their plan was to dispose of it. I suspect the passengers were killed. Evidence from witnesses on the ground claims some of the bodies stank of decomposition and drained of blood. The original passengers of flight MH17 were just the victims of this atrocity. Will the truth ever come out? I suspect not. The people, if you can call them that rule our planet are pure evil Satan worshippers who have been involved in genocide for decades, and unless this evil controlling elite and their shadow government are overthrown, any chance of surviving this NIBIRU event is very slim. Also, the down flight was a diversionary tactic so Israel could attack the Gaza. This Zionist attack is responsible for the deaths of countless innocent women and children. The Western powers are tight-lipped and refuse to criticize this Zionist-controlled Jewish state. This attack was carried out in response to missiles being fired into Israel by Hamas. But the Jewish state's response was overwhelming, and they should have halted their bombing campaign within days, not carrying on just killing innocent people for the hell of it. This is genocide. Have the Jewish people not learnt from history and how they suffered at the hands of Hitler's Germany and the concentration camps in Poland? This is unacceptable. Israel should be ashamed of their actions. But will things change? I fear not, until a more moderate leadership comes to power. But only the people of Israel can decide that. This follow-up report originates from abledanger.net, titled MH17 all but completely proven to be Flight 370, and the source of this information is Jim Stone Freelance, and it was posted on the 18th of July 2014. Military commander, passengers dead long before plane took off. The bodies were dead for days before the flight and smelling of rot, according to a top military commander at the scene, which would be expected if they were actually from Flight 370. They would have been loaded on the plane dead to make sure no one could speak about what went on. To view the full evidence and transcript, go to my website endtimes23.com, where I've posted the link. There's a live link to my website near the end of this video. This next report by the Informer is what I believe could well turn out to be another threat to the global community. Ebola virus is out of control in Western Africa. Ebola was first detected in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2014 and has spread to Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Unless this virus is treated at the very early stages of infection, 99% of those infected will die. At present, there has been over 7,000 cases confirmed. Now other countries around the planet are on red alert, watching out for new cases. People flying in from these hotspot zones could well be travelling with this deadly virus. In the early stages of infection, there are no symptoms, and by the time they become ill, they could have infected countless other people. So how did this virus become such a threat to the global community? Well, the elite tried their best to produce a bird flu virus that would trigger a global pandemic, but they failed. So are these same criminals in the shadow government behind this attempt to cause a global pandemic? I believe so. This following report originates from kkglorychurch.com, titled The End of the World as We Know It by Brother Graham. Planet X, will it affect the Sun? NIBIRU Xena won't be visible for a year or two, but it's still a government secret. The gravitational effects will cause sunspots on the side of the Sun facing NIBIRU, which we won't see yet, but when it enters the side of the solar system we are occupying, the effect on the weather and seismic events will be catastrophic. Dramatic changes have been recorded for years on other planets. How will it affect the Earth? The Atlantic Ocean Gulf Stream has slowed down by 30%, a result of too much fresh water from the melting polar ice caps and Greenland. The salinity of the ocean drives the Gulf Stream, and as salinity decreases, so too does rate of flow. Scientists say the Gulf Stream will eventually stop altogether, a disaster of epic proportions, for it keeps the east coast of the US and UK temperate. Moscow, Great Britain, has no snow. They are the same distance from the North Pole, but is now much colder as the Gulf Stream slows down. There's a high chance the North Pole will be completely melted in 5 years. Yes, from global warming, but the cause is the approach of NIBIRU, not greenhouse gases caused by mankind. What is the end result to mankind? Without the Atlantic Gulf Stream, the Atlantic coast of the US and Great Britain will be like Moscow, all brought on by NIBIRU as it approaches the sun and then leaves the solar system. How many years have we had global warming? When NIBIRU is on the same side of the sun as the Earth, the worst effects will occur. The sunspot activity on our side of the sun will worsen weather drastically and satellite communications will degrade. Weather will worsen until NIBIRU recedes, while volcanoes, earthquakes and tsunamis will displace millions of people. If the Gulf Stream stops completely, it could take centuries for the polar ice packs and Greenland to regain the deposits of ice and snow, thus increasing the salinity of the oceans and restarting the Atlantic Gulf Stream and other ocean currents affected. Tidal effects increase without the moderation of ocean currents, making it hard to live on the shoreline. If this best case scenario were expected to happen, the governments wouldn't have been so secretive. It would have been difficult but possible to overcome, like when we all pulled together to weather World War II, as we perform miracles in science, technology and manufacturing. Now we have not been given this opportunity to cooperate, excel and survive as a nation. The 1984 Big Brother mentality has become a daily reality as we become effectively neutralized in the decision-making process. The wolves and snakes behind the scenes are firmly in control as life as we know it comes to an end. The worst case scenario is the one the governments believe and is preparing for, with all the relevant astronomical data as NIBIRU approaches, with the times, the dates relevant to the Sun, Earth and other planets. They have loads of scientific brainpower and the best computers and measuring devices to predict all of the effects it will have on the Earth. They have the orbiting telescopes and other satellite instruments with which to measure and compute what is going to happen to us all. The best way that we, the people, have of predicting the coming event is to observe the government's preparations, which are hidden in plain sight. Our government is preparing for a shift of the world's polar axis and its inevitable devastation to the whole world. This is not science fiction, for it has happened in the distant past. The Earth is roughly egg-shaped and has a slight wobble to it. If you were to point a fixed camera to the North Star exactly at the North Pole in a 24-hour period, you would see that it described a figure-8 path, not fixed at one point. The magma under the crust of the Earth moves about somewhat and can be detected by recording the movements of the magnetic North Pole, MNP. The recorded path of the MNP shows that it has been moving from northern Canada in the direction of Siberia, accelerating in the last 25 years. This acceleration is likely a precursor to the polar axis shift. Before the last one, there was 360, not 365 days in a year, which is where the 360-day year of the Jewish calendar comes from. Because the circumference of the world at the equator was smaller, and this could change again, creating a new equator and degrading most of the geosynchronous satellites too, just junk in the sky, ceasing to function. The exceptions are those equipped with enough fuel and rocket motors to move to the new geosynchronous location. Government scientists are preparing to keep at least some satellite assets in operation. Due to centrifugal force, the equator's seawater bulge contains cubic miles of water, and when the Earth's axis shifts, this bulge will slosh, creating tsunamis, devastating coastal regions around the world. This all will take place between a few days to a week and settle down within a month. There is a US Navy map indicating the projected shorelines after the big event. If the new polar axis moves in the direction of Siberia, the equator will move northwards towards the US, and the equatorial seawater bulge will put our coasts under water. The sea level will increase and decrease at other locations as the new bulge of seawater at the equator will fix world water levels to a new point of equilibrium to stabilize the Earth in its rotation around the new axis. This following report originates from axischange.wordpress.com, titled Earth's axis has changed, and this was posted on the 2nd of July 2014. 2014 changes in solar position. An update on the sun position. For the first time since the significant axis shift in 2004, which we've been tracking since 2006, the 2014 summer solstice measurements on June the 21st, 2014 have shown another increase of the sun position to the north, where it was settling about 10 o'clock to the north on a clock face. It is now about 10:15 to 10:45 towards the north from where I measured it in Texas, and 10 o'clock from Salt Lake viewpoints. I have expected the Salt Lake City latitude to be closer to 9, so that means the sun is much further north of the Tropic of Cancer than the 1,200 miles I estimated, more like 2,000 miles north of the mid-Mexican Tropic of Cancer, perhaps north of Washington State. I wish we had heard from somewhere in Seattle or anywhere on that latitude. This explains the changes in the weather this year. Increased solar position towards the north is increasing melt and evaporation of the glacial ice, thus increasing humidity levels. This explains the high fog we are seeing over Texas each morning this year. This is the first time I've seen this kind of weather in Texas during 20 years of residence. Daily high fog is normal in Northern California, but not Texas. I have also read some interesting articles on the rampant increases in Greenland's glacier melting and loss of ice reflectivity, indicating heavy bottom melting. So this corresponds with what we are seeing with the sun and unusual weather. Fortunately, our planet still remains the same distance from the sun. To view the full transcript, go to my website endtimes23.com, where I've posted the link. There's a live link to my website near the end of this video. This final report originates from zetatalk.com, titled the Zeta Talk Newsletter, issue 408, and this was posted on Sunday, July the 27th, 2014. Zeta Talk explanation, the 12th of July, 2014. Since the Earth is tilted at an angle, the ecliptic, the Sun's middle, is not seen as a line straight across the sky, except perhaps at high noon. In the northern hemisphere, the Sun may rise in the east and set in the west, but during the day the Sun is found further to the south in the sky than where it rises and sets. In the southern hemisphere, this is reversed. In the southern hemisphere, the Sun may rise in the east and set in the west, but the Sun will veer to the north for its apex. In the photos placed against a static backdrop, the Sun can be seen holding too far to the south from what is expected. The Earth's wobble is such that when the magnetic north pole of Earth comes over the horizon, the globe gets a polar push, pushing the north pole of Earth away to avoid the blast from the north pole of planet X. This is when the Sun is high over the Pacific or dawn in Australia. Thus, as Australia is moving north at that time, the Sun overhead seems to be curving too far to the south. Those familiar with these mechanics know they can check with a planetarium program such as Sky Map to ascertain the expected angle of the ecliptic from any place at any time, which is what Nancy has done to examine the time-lapse photo from Australia. The Sun rising along the ecliptic shows the Earth at an improper angle, the wobble captured in action. More evidence of the Earth wobble hit the press when more data on the increasing ice at Antarctica was published. This is of course contrary to the global warming theory, which states that the air is warmer and the poles are melting. The conundrum for the global warming theory is that this is a glaring example that the Earth's wobble and not CO2 emissions are responsible for the Earthchanges, as detailed in issue 322 of this newsletter in December of 2012. The wobble is worsening. To view the full transcript, go to my website endtimes23.com, where I've posted the link. There's a live link to my website near the end of this video. Okay my friends, you're all invited to join this channel by subscribing to endtimes23, which is a totally free subscription service. You're also invited to add me as a friend on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. If you'd like to drop me a line on my blog, by all means do so, or if you'd like to join one of my circles on Google+, the links are under this video. All this week's news links can be found on my website, endtimes23.com. There's a live link to my website near the end of this video. Well, that's your lot for this week, my friends. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. I'll be back with you in a week's time with another edition of Cosmic News. So until then, this is your informer signing off, friends. I'll see you on the flip side. As part of their plan to distract the public from the incoming NIBIRU system. This plan is well underway. The Middle East is in complete turmoil thanks to the United States and Western powers causing instability in the whole region. They aim to divide the Muslim communities, causing fighting between different Muslim groups, which they have achieved. Their original plan to cause a devastating war with Iran has failed thanks to moderate politicians coming to power in Iran, who knew what the Western powers were up to and reversed their policy of complete hostility to the United States. And they planned a dialogue. The United States don't know. The Russian leadership and the United States leadership are the closest of allies and have been involved in the secret space program together for decades. They also have joint bases on the Moon and Mars. The anti-Russian campaign by the mainstream news media in the States is playing mind games with the great American people and the world. All the major power players in the world have been briefed about the coming of NIBIRU and the plan to initiate a third global war. Do you really think the Russians would not have retaliated by now if these two great countries were not friends? Of course they would. But you can expect with them, which is going on to this present day. Syria was another failed project after the US had caused the instability of that country, which they expected the leadership to collapse and their puppet regime would be installed. But the Assad government remained resolute and strong, and I believe is now gaining the upper hand. So after this failed project, the elite then turned to Ukraine, where they were behind installing this Nazi-controlled government to power, and the attacks on the east of that country followed. These criminals that are causing mayhem and death and destruction in that once proud nation are now making sure their shells fall into Russia. Now for what the people of the United This is Informer News, your voice of the people. Timeline is Sunday the 17th of August 2014. Welcome along, my friends, to another edition of Informer News. Coming up in this week's broadcast, WORMWOOD, NIBIRU, the end of the world as we know it is fast approaching. Plus, overwhelming evidence the plane shot down over Ukraine was Flight 370. Was this shoot-down ordered by Washington to dispose of the evidence of the plane and passengers that ended up in Diego Garcia, a US military base? Also, Ebola virus, now sweeping Western Africa, could become a threat to us all. Are we seeing the onset of a new horrific global pandemic? Plus the genocide being carried out by the Zionist-controlled Jewish state, and proof the Earth's axis has changed. Okay, into this week's news. This first report is an Informer News presentation. Over the months and years, the Informer has been warning you all that the shadow governments, the controlling elite of the United States, are planning to trigger a third global war.